Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Abel Mongela from Netsheria International. I'll be your host for this webinar. Just a background on Netsheria. Netsheria is an online legal platform that provides bespoke legal services to startups, techpreneurs, people in the business world, and also creatives by leveraging on technology. The topic for the day is turning your online side hustle into a business, and the presenter will dissect into the issue and provide relevant insights for any business owner. If you'd like more information on Netsheria, please feel free to visit our website at netsheria.com. Please feel free to use the chat box for any questions you may have, and we will also provide the recording after this webinar. And now, here is our speaker, Judy Murioki.
Hi everyone, my name is Judy Murioki. I'm happy that you're here. I am an associate in Netsheria. I'm a lawyer by training. I am a tech lawyer. I call myself a tech lawyer. That means that I focus on the corporate, commercial, and technology law aspects of businesses. I tend to work with technology businesses, entrepreneurs, people that basically are building products within the tech ecosystem. So I'm happy that you're here. And without further ado, we begin. So a number of you that are here know about online businesses. You may be running your business as a hobby, as a side hustle, supplements your income, or you are planning your exit from formal employment towards doing business full time. And I know that it's either you or someone that you are aware of who is doing the same. Just a second. So the things that are making this possible for all of you include access to the internet, by which you are also able to join this call, and you have access to some sort of application or platform. By application or platform, I mean your storefronts. Every time I say storefront in this webinar, think your Jumia, Kilimall type of platforms, or you have access to social media platforms that are also functioning as storefronts. The idea behind a storefront is to be able to display your goods or display your services in a marketing sense, but also in like a window shopping sense of the word. And then people are able to see it, you're able to interact with users, and you're able to conclude buying and selling from that point of view. So that's what I mean when I say storefronts. So on those platforms, it's also possible for you to advertise, it's possible for you to sell without ever having met someone in person up until the point of delivery. And that's an experience I feel most of us are aware of. So with buying food online, with doing Jumia Black Friday weeks, all those you bought from these massive companies without having to go to their store. Think Garnier, think all the tech firms that are selling phones, etc. So that's the idea I want us to have. Yeah. So when does your online sale become a business? Generally, not everyone selling online considers themselves a business. Yeah. So some of the things that we have to think about as per the next slide of what makes it a business is the issue of financial records. Are you keeping financial records? Do you have money going in, money going out in a book form? Do you do bookkeeping? Are you relying on that money for your living expenses? Because if you are, it is assumed that you're making income that is able to satisfy your life expenses. The other question is, have you made money from that activity before in a consistent manner? Or have you made money from that, any profit from that activity generally in the past? If some of those questions are answerable, then you might be on your way to becoming an online business. So where we want to go next, per the next slide, if you're answering yes to any of those questions, then a few considerations come to play. For example, there are professionals, there are a set of professionals that you want to start working with. Some of those professionals include lawyers like ourselves. And the reason around wanting to do more of that is, number one, compliance. Compliance is the idea that a business owner, is doing what they're required to do per the law. And the law says a lot of things. So the idea behind it is you're doing what you need to do, your books are clean, your setup is done properly. That's what we mean by compliance. And obviously it has technicalities. Number two, you avoid penalties because as many of us, we have interacted with KRA, I'm sure you're aware that with enough failures, let's call them, or omissions in terms of filing tax returns, penalties and fines start to accumulate. So if you don't have a license and you are realized by the county, you are eligible for a fine. So the other reason for wanting to do a proper setup for your business is to avoid the penalties. The next thing is growth readiness. And by growth readiness, I mean a few things. I mean, number one, can you access loans? If anyone has tried to access any sort of financing from formal institutions all the way to more informal setups, you know that they want to be sure that you are a trustworthy business. Some of that trustworthiness is about setting up good structures. The other thing around growth readiness is if you want payments integration. If you run business online, you want people to be able to pay you. In this country, we are very advanced in the sense that someone can pay you directly to your number, but there are also more formalized options like till numbers. I don't know if anyone of you is aware, but if you want to get a till number, you need to give a certificate of registration or a certificate of your business name. That basically assumes that you have done your proper legal setup, you know? And then if you want to get into partnerships, the other person will think about your formalized business as a source of confidence to them. So if you don't do proper setup, the other person may think you're sketchy because you have no books, you are not tax compliant. There are a lot of risks on their end. Lastly, you are able to secure a bigger market because as your market increases, consumer protection issues become real. And I'm also sure, given our experience with online business as a people in Kenya, we've come across, there are those jokes on Twitter about the Twitter tailor, someone who you took, expectations versus reality, or someone who sold you something, and then when it arrived at your doorstep, it was completely different from your expectations. And so a big part of growth readiness is being legally set up in a way that protects your future business partners, your future goals around fundraising and partnerships, and also your future consumers. Because under the law and generally in business practice, it's something we need to be able to assure all those parties of. So we're going to move on. What do we need to think about in terms of requirements for opening an online retail business? Now, the term retail here gives the idea that sales of either goods and services are being made in smaller amounts. I'm contrasting that as against the idea of wholesale. Anyone who has perhaps gone to like a big market, has gone to buy items wholesale, you understand that wholesale means you bought very many items, probably at source or at a supplier near source. So manufacturers have their own outlets, but we're not going to be dealing with wholesale. We're dealing purely with retail. So some of your requirements will depend on what type of business are you running, in the sense that, are you selling goods or are you selling services? By selling services, I mean you have skills that are applicable, that are tradable on an online platform. So easy examples or common examples include people that do social media marketing, for example. That's a skill set that can be offered purely online. If you're a graphic designer, if you're a software engineer, some of those skills are more commercially. So some of those skills you have to sell. Right? The second question is, where are you constantly? Do your consumers call you? Are your consumers ready your customers DM you, direct message you, sorry, on Instagram or on Twitter, your consumers filling in a form on our website. We need to think about contact points because with the contact points, there are legal considerations. For example, there's data that you're going to collect, and that data is governed in some ways or other in the law. The other thing you want to know is who are all the other parties. So we've talked about many different examples of businesses. So say if we go back to the Jumia example. In the Jumia example, you go on the application, you buy what you're buying. The company that's selling through Jumia will make sure the item gets to you. If you think about all the parties that are participating in that transaction, you have riders. Some of those riders are usually independent. That means the company that you're buying from needs to assure you that those goods will get you through riders, you know. So there are many other people other than just the person who's making the goods or services to be able to sell. So at that point, when you start to see that number of considerations, you also should probably get advice. Moving on, we'll be going into a bit more activities for the legal requirements and we will start with business registration. The idea around business registration is there are many different forms that can make up a business. Sometimes you want to do a business by yourself, sometimes you want to do a business with others. And so business registration answers the question of who is doing the business and who are they working with. So on the screen you have before you the business name. The business name is what usually happens with sole proprietors. So a sole proprietor is where one person wants to do business. In law, we say trading as a certain name. So for example, Judy Morioki trading as JM Legal or something of that sort. The idea behind the name is that there is no company structure, so to speak. So you register a name and then you trade under that name. The other way to do it is to register a limited liability partnership. This is more popular with people that are offering professional services. So think your accountants, your tax people, your lawyers, your architects, engineers, people that can come together around a similar skill set. There are different types of partnerships, but an LLP is most recommended. Partnerships, though, now in a general sense, what we call a GP, a general partnership, can also be used for people who are not in any particular professional sector. So it's not limited to people that share a skill set, but it is more advised that way. Then you have the limited liability company, which is the favorite of many. So the limited liability company, at its core, what I would like you to think about is a group of people that are coming together to become the body of the company. What does that mean? It means that you have shareholders. It means you probably have a governance structure such as a board, depending on how advanced it is. It's possible to open a company of one person, but at the very minimum, the Companies Act would require you to have 2 shareholders, which is the minimum. Because if you have less than 2 shareholders, then you can't be constituted as a company under the Companies Act. Private companies also have a maximum shareholding of 50 people. So with that 50 people, you want to think about, will I be taking on any more shareholders? If I'm taking on any more shareholders, do I have the proper form, again, structures to ensure that those people that are coming as shareholders are protected? So the next thing we want to talk about are
sauti iko na shida. Hey.
On to the next slide.
Speak.
So on to the next slide. Sorry about that. The other legal considerations we want to work with is the tax bill. So you probably have a tax bill as an individual, but if you open a business, you are also required to set up a tax bill. So in this country, we register businesses through what's called eCitizen. So on your eCitizen portal, you probably have BRS, Business Registration Services option, under which all of those applications are made. When you are making that application, they send you a one-time password to an email address of your choice, whatever email you put in. That ensures from a government point of view that whoever is registering a business is registering it for compliance. Around a similar issue, a lot of people tend to avoid the issue of getting a tax PIN, but if you remember the considerations we discussed earlier, for example, growth readiness, you know this is something you want to have, so a tax PIN. It will support you in trying to create a bank account, for example, and trying to access loans, trying to access government services. And so really from a growth perspective, you want to have a tax PIN. The next issue we're going to go into is contracts and sale documents. So before I delve further into the idea of contracts, some questions I want you to be thinking about is who are you selling to? Who's the other person in your transaction? Who owns the platform? Who is hosting you, for example? Because if you're being hosted, then there are considerations that go into that. Or if it's your own website, then we have to think about how is your website set up. Further than how is your website set up, we have to think about if it's goods, what are your supply chains looking like? Do you have contracts with your suppliers? Do you have contracts with your third-party service providers when you think about things like delivery? And then if you're using a shopfront, what type of documents does the shopfront require from you? So if you're opening a store on Kilimall, what is Kilimall going to require of you? So, excuse me, a bit on the idea of contracts. A contract legally is a binding agreement. It's an agreement between a willing buyer and a willing seller of goods and services. And for the agreement, they are exchanging something that in law we call consideration. So in an online business sense, the consideration usually will be the money that you're receiving from your consumers as you release to them whatever goods or services they have requested from you. So in every situation where there is an exchange of willing buyer, willing seller, you want to think about what is the agreement underlying this. Why you want to think about that issue of the agreement is because of, one, consumer protection, because consumers are protected in contracts. Through contracts, consumers are able to bring up their issues. So for example, if you buy something online, as has been my experience, where I bought something online and the person on the other side didn't offer me a contract, it was on Instagram, so it was very informal. When that deal went bad, when the delivery happened and I did get what I needed, I had no recourse. My only option was to contact the online store. When I was contacting the online store, I got no feedback. They basically stopped responding to me, which is a phenomenon that many of us are familiar with. So consumers rely on contracts for protection, especially online, because as can be proven, anything can happen. The seller can change their mind. They can decide they already have the money and therefore they don't want to do the back and forth with you. The other thing that you want to think about is the documents that come with your sale. So do you have your invoices? Do you have all your records basically that would go into proving how you are getting in your goods and services and how you are dispensing them, which comes in handy with doing your accounting and with doing your tax compliance. So when you consider what your business looks like, you want to think about how many parties are there, what are the agreements I'm making with these parties, either as consumers or as suppliers to yourself. You also want to consider what the important things are. So consideration, what's the money going out? What's the value I'm exchanging for that money? The other thing you want to consider is when are the payments being made? Because that's also something that you can govern in contract. When are the payments being made? How are the payments being made? Then in terms of like dispute resolution, like in the example I just gave you, that's also something that you can cater for in contract. Dispute resolution can be either because your consumers have grievances against you, or because you have grievances against another service provider. So for example, your website host or your shopfront, the shopfront service provider, the e-commerce platform rather, or the person who's supplying you raw material. All those people are potential disputes if you think about it in terms of contract and the exchange of value. So you also want to have your contracts well set up. Moving on, you have the issue of the online privacy policy. Particularly for online businesses, the idea behind them is that you are dispensing your services through an, let's say, digitally accessible or internet accessible platform. So a mobile application or a web application. Yeah. So the moment you have that online dynamic, we now live in a time where there are certain obligations that have arisen around the kind of information that you are collecting. But you see, the question of who's collecting the information or rather data and what is happening to the data is of interest to the government, to the compliance entity. So in Kenya, you have the Data Protection Office. It's of interest to the consumer. It's of interest to you. It's of interest to all the other parties you're dealing with. So Kenya's data protection regime is under, as it says on the screen, the Data Protection Act of 2019. The regulations came out in 2021, and the government of Kenya we have an article in the Constitution, I think it should be 35 if I'm not wrong, around the right to privacy. So privacy, or what you do with people's information, is no longer just the domain of the business. It's the domain of everyone who's involved, including the government. But it's not that simple, because if the website is yours, then what are the obligations that come to you? If the site belongs to someone else, what are the obligations that come to them? Why is that important? Because very simply, under our data protection law, which is modeled on a global data protection standard that was set up in the EU, something that's called the General Data Protection Regulations of 2019, they create, in that relationship that emerges concerning data, they create names for different entities. So the person giving you data is called a data subject. So if I feed in any information, for example, as you are registering for this webinar, there was a form. On that form, you put in your name, your contact, etc. You, as the person who's filling in that information, you are considered a data subject in law. And attached to the idea of a data subject is many rights that come with that. The person who is receiving the data may be one of two things. They may be something called a data processor or a data controller. The difference between them, the controller is the entity that is making processing decisions. The entity that says, I've received all this data, my objectives are X or Y or Z, and therefore I want this to be done. That entity is considered the data controller. The data processor is any person who is in any way transforming the form of that data from one form to another. So anyone who is putting that data together and cleaning it and running perhaps one formula or other, or anyone who is transferring that data to a bigger data pool, anything you do with the data, you become a data processor. So as you can see, there are obligations that now come along with any kind of data you use. So this is a bit of a background on why you need an online privacy policy. So what will a privacy policy respond to? To respond to a lot of things, but some of that is what kind of information is being collected. Usually you have your name, your contact details, you have financial information. When you think about checking out on an online, checking out products on an online platform, you think they will ask you, do you pay MasterCard, Visa, M-Pesa? And that information that is supportive of that payment is financial information, because it's your credit card number, the CVC details, the ones that are at the back of your card, that belongs in the realm of financial information, you know. So other than that, depending on your on the site you're on, some sites are collecting IP, excuse me. Some sites are collecting IP addresses, they're collecting browser information, and I'm sure you've come across the whole issue of cookies. And so you understand the idea that if you've ever read the cookie policy, which I recommend that you do, considering you are a demographic that is capable of needing a cookie policy given online business, you want to know what cookies are, what cookies do, what kind of information the cookies are collecting, so that it informs you on your decisions around your obligations, either as a processor or as a data controller. The other thing that your online privacy policy is responding to is how and where the information is being collected. Is it by a first party being you as the business? Is it a third party? That means, are you giving other people access to your users on the sites? And I'm sure you've seen, again, because of our likely usage of the internet, to do with third party cookie policies, which is something we can very much go into in another forum. Then is the information you're collecting permanent? Are you keeping it for a long time? Or is the information you're collecting only for the session, so that if I take too long and then I refresh, it will tell me session has expired, and then it auto refills my details on the platform, which will tell you the site collected the information for that session. So there's all sorts of questions around how and where the data is being collected. The last thing that perhaps you want to consider having on your online privacy policy is why the information is being collected. So again, which I very highly recommend doing, if you read through an online privacy policy, you will come across companies giving you their reasons for having those on the say cookies, for example. They want to improve your user experience, they want to run market analytics, they want to figure out your preferences so that they can direct more specific content to you. And so from a business point of view, as a business owner, you have many reasons for wanting to collect free information. But in the regime that we live in, your consumers, your users of your site have every right to know what it is you're going to do with that information. So yeah, on to the next slide. The other thing you want to respond to is, will you be sharing information with third parties? So for context, if you've been reading the news, you know about some big companies that have been accused of unlawfully sharing information with third parties. So that includes the likes of Facebook, which, if you come across the stories, you know about the complaints surrounding Facebook integration. What do I mean by Facebook integration? I mean, have you ever noticed how sometimes with new products, if you're setting up an account, they give you an option to sign in with Facebook? The idea behind signing in with Facebook is that whatever information Facebook has on you is now at that point of sharing, of creating the account, being shared with this new website, this new service provider. And so that's an easy or a simple, accessible way to think about sharing of data with third parties. Third-party data sharing has resulted in many cases. Europe is replete with case history on the big tech companies sharing data. And so in many ways, there are considerations that are lawful and some are unlawful. The basic idea being consent. So you will see for many of your platforms, and it's something you might want to have on your site as a business owner. If you are intending to share that information with anyone else, you want consent from your users. That consent issue is a legal requirement. It's a global standard, but it's also in the Data Protection Act of Kenya 2019. So that's a bit around third-party sharing. The other thing is consumer rights around their personal information, around their data. In the Constitution, around rights to privacy, but then also under the Data Protection Act, data subjects, which we said is the person who's feeding information onto your platform, has rights to that information. Yeah, so they have a right to know what you're going to do with the information and how it's going to be done. They have rights around not being profiled. They have rights to decline. They have rights to request you to delete. The right to deletion is one that has been really difficult to enforce, but you want to think about as a business owner, as my consumers are using my platform, how will I guarantee their rights? Because as we advance in the digital economy, you will notice that there is more vigilance. Consumers are more vigilant about their interests, and that includes their data. So as you're setting up and you're planning on your growth, you want to think through what are their rights and how do I ensure that should I be called upon to respond to the rights and to assure them of their rights, I have the setup, I have the requisite structures to give them their rights, and then you have the requisite structures to protect yourself as a business against any sort of liability or pursuit that your consumers may engage in. This is particularly interesting because now Kenya has a data protection office, which is in the process of setting up, so hiring and doing some of the administrative work. And so soon there will be a mechanism by which Kenyans can report data specific consumer issues, because there are consumer rights platforms in this country, but there are now data specific consumer issues. And so as a business that's running online, this is something you want to think about. Then lastly, it's a way for you to give out your details, your business contact details, so that from the consumer's point of view, should they want to reach out to you and ask questions and seek clarifications or want to assert some of their rights, that information is available there. So that's a brief on what will be contained in your online privacy policy. Moving on, you have online terms and conditions. Terms and conditions from a website point of view are essentially a global contract. By global, I mean, because websites don't issue contracts to every single person, applications don't issue contracts to every single person, they will include a terms and conditions. The terms and conditions are your agreement between the owner of the site and the user of the site on how using the site will work. So that's a practical way to think about it. Since not everyone who comes to your website will receive a contract, there are things that you want to protect yourself against as a business, and there are things you want to give notice of to your users. So some of that may be information accuracy disclaimer. Think about it, for example, if you are the owner of a shopfront. The shopfront is very popular because shopfronts have a lot of parties. So you own Kilimall, for example. You have all these people coming to put up their products, and with that product placement on your site, there's information that they are giving. You know, they're telling your users or your site visitors, these shoes are worth this much, or this skincare product is worth this much. It can be accessed through this, that, and the other. Basically, there are parties that are offering information through your platform. Or you are the one who is in fact offering information to your users on your Instagram or on your website. You want to think about that information and how it's being given, because the accuracy of it is a legal issue. Under consumer protection law in Kenya, specifically the Consumer Protection Act, misrepresentation is an offense. Misrepresentation is the idea that you gave someone information and then for one reason or another, it turned out to be false. Those falsities are things that you want to work through in your contract, because you are going to be liable for it. So that's something you can do with your terms and conditions. Terms of sale are something else you want to work with. Remember that these are products that are being sold from a distance. So instead of going to a shop, someone is going to a site or whatever your trade option is, and they are offering, you are accepting, you are exchanging money, and then you are assuring them that whatever they have paid for is going to arrive to their house, their door front. So the terms of that sale, you want to think about them from the point of view of, okay, how are these goods going to get to them? Do they know about it? How is the purchase taking place? What about if they decline? What about if they cancel? So you have many factors that, since you're not giving every person an individual contract, you want to think about putting them in your terms and conditions. And remember, as we said, they will differ if you're the one selling versus if you are the one who owns the site through which sales are being made. Moving on to the next one, we talk about terms of payment, which is a big one. So terms of payment, think about the payment option. So we've spoken about payment integrations earlier. So your Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, M-Pesa options, and then the question of when the payment is being made. Is the payment being made on checkout? Is the payment being made on delivery? Is the payment being made all at once, like a lump sum? Is the payment being made in breakdowns, like a deposit and then a later payment? Those factors have a lot to do with how your business is run, but they also have a lot to do with decisions that you're making as a service provider. For example, there will be platforms that have both options. You can pay on checkout and you can also pay on delivery. Then your consumers will prefer one or the other. There are, if you're giving up a service, there are services where you will want a deposit to come in first, and then after that you will want to be paid the full amount on delivery of the business. So the issue of terms of payment is dependent on you as a service provider, is dependent on the nature of your business, and then is dependent on your consumer preferences, because the business has to make consumer friendly decisions. And so that's something else that you can put in your terms of payment. The other things that usually come around terms of payment is cancellation, because if you have made part payment and then cancellation takes place, what happens? That is a legal question. It's also a practical question. If someone wants to claim for a refund, what happens? Who is responsible for making the refund? How should your users claim a refund? All those are things that you can address in your online terms and conditions for your business. So you can approach it, whatever platform you're choosing to use to sell, to trade, whatever your goods or services are. Terms of payment is a question you have to respond to as a business. So moving on. Shipping and delivery. Shipping and delivery, I think, is one that we're also all quite familiar with. It depends on the business as well, and it depends on what your supply, let me call it, ecosystem is. So for example, if you are shipping internationally, where are the charges? When are the charges being paid? If the goods are being shipped locally, you've seen the option for the previous slide. Thank you. You've seen the option around shipping within Nairobi or deliveries within Nairobi is free, then deliveries in the rest of Nairobi, you pay a premium. So you have questions like that. You have estimated times of delivery. If you've used Jumia, you've seen things like estimated arrival is 2 weeks from now. That's information that your consumers want because it gives them certainty. And that certainty is important to the contract and therefore to your relationship with them. Then lastly, if you're offering free shipping, those are things that you want to communicate. What are the terms and conditions around free shipping? That's something that you want to think about as well. Then you have IP. How are you protecting your logo? How are you protecting your content? Depending on what your trade is, how is it being protected? And IP itself is something that we can go into great depths on, but in the world of online business, thinking about IP and IP protection is a very big consideration, just because your online presence is predicated heavily and supported heavily by use of IP relevant material. So I'll leave that at that for now. The next thing we want to talk about is disclaimers on liability. Liability, especially around products, is a dicey issue if you're not the one who is making the product. So manufacturer versus the person who is delivering. How is the liability distributed? And how are we disclaiming that liability as the online platform? Moving on, the external linkage. External links, meaning if someone lands on my site, are there any third-party websites that are connected to my site? Because as you can recall in our discussion on data, the question of third-party access to data is a big one. Yeah, and that integration, you probably made that integration as a business decision. Perhaps it was more profitable for yourself. It was more strategic for yourself as a business, but there are legal implications on it, and those are things that your customers would like to know. Then terms of use of your service, terms of use of your website, for example, Sometimes some websites disclaim things like, when you use this service, you are old enough, like you are at the age of majority, you are a competent user, you are able to understand the service and therefore can navigate that service by themselves. Because again, the business needs to protect itself against liability. Moving on, IP generally, as mentioned earlier, I said we can shelve that one. You want to think about, as a business, what are the IP elements that I possess that are protectable? So because we are considering online selling in particular, you're more likely to be concerned with things like your brand name, things like your slogans, things like your logos. We've all seen situations where, or I personally have encountered someone who started an online business, but when they went to create their Twitter handle online, there was another Twitter account that was using the exact same name. And I know that from a business point of view, from her end, required her to step back and reconsider and reevaluate. So that's something that's pretty common, especially because as you're selling online, your brand is a big part of your online presence. And so thinking about that brand protection, sometimes use is not enough. A lot of entrepreneurs rely on simply use of the brand to claim ownership. But when you think about it, the duplicity is common and the lack of protection is an issue for you as an entrepreneur. So you want to think about, first of all, how that protection will be strategized. So you want to go into a bit of like your IP management, your IP strategy, but eventually you want to think about how you're going to protect it, because if you have no registered mark, which is the idea around IP protection, then someone else can use it, and in law, your claim is not as strong without said protection. So that's something that you also want to think about as you grow and as you expand, as you're reaching international clients with your goods or with your services. It's something you really want to think about, because the brand forms a big part of the value of your company. So moving on from that, legal and accounting and tax advice. Lastly, it's, as we've been discussing throughout this webinar, we've talked about why tax setup is important, but beyond the issue of tax setup is the issue of tax compliance. So filing your taxes is a question. Making sure you file the right category of taxes, because there are different kinds of taxes, is important. So if you have an income, you have income taxes. Income taxes apply both for individuals, but there's also an income tax, a corporate income tax for businesses, or if you're paying tax as an individual, think the sole proprietor or partners. Partners pay taxes out of their income instead, because the partnership gives profits to the partners. And so how's that profit being taxed? Who is doing your bookwork for you? If you're selling services, how are you accounting for VAT? Do you understand the VAT framework? If you're offering services and that other person is telling you they're going to withhold an amount, that withheld tax, do you understand what that means? Do you understand what it means when it comes to you filing your returns? So as I mentioned earlier, the issue around legal tax compliance specifically, thinking about it from how it supports your growth and it supports the legitimacy of your business, will lead you towards hopefully desiring to understand the tax framework for the sake of you being able to expand your business. With that said, thank you for your time. Thank you for your presence. Again, we said we are Netsheria, we are boutique. That means we are very customizable, we are tech savvy, we are tech driven, and we will service your online business online. We're able to offer it on a platform. If you visited our website, you've been able to see it. It's fast, it's cost effective, and it's timely. Again, I'm very grateful for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy Murioki, for that insightful session. I hope you all enjoyed this amazing presentation. Now, the Netsheria to take any questions that you may have. I think we have a question in the chat box asking if the recording and the slides will be there after the presentation. Yes, we will provide the slides and we'll also provide the recording after the presentation. Any other questions? A lady by the name Maggie Karaba is asking, hey Judy, this was awesome. I just wanted to ask if you guys know the tax frameworks around selling internationally, not in the capacity of export. I will send that over to the Netsheria team.
Hello? Abel? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, you can hear.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Judy, for a very insightful presentation. Thank you, Maggie, for your question. My name is Njomo Kamau. I'm a director at Netsheria. I work with Judy and one or two other team members, and we provide the services Judy has talked about as Netsheria for startups and entrepreneurs. So this is an interesting question about the tax frameworks around selling internationally. So we do have connections with a tax team who are able to advise you, of course, because we know that the tax frameworks around the world are quite diverse and unique. So maybe then we'd be able, if you then, Maggie, get in touch with us and ask us, you can brief us directly as to whether you're looking at any particular country, and then we'll be able to then give you specific advice based on that, and then you can take it forward from there. Otherwise, we are in a position to help you, and we look forward to getting your further clarification on that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Njomo, for taking that question. Anyone else who has a question, feel free to use the chat box. For the people who have joined, we will provide the slides and the recording right after the webinar. I think there is no other question. Thank you again, Netsheria team, for answering those questions and for the great presentation. It was a pleasure to have all of you with us. So this concludes the webinar. Thank you all for attending. We hope you learned and that you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.